Amanda Ross was 14 years old when she watched her father's casket lowered into the ground. Detective Jack Ross had been a hero, a beloved police officer gunned down while trying to stop a robbery. His killer, Robert Kane, was sentenced to death. That day, standing at her father's grave, Amanda made a promise: she would become a prosecutor, and she would watch Robert Kane die. For 15 years, she worked toward that single goal: law school, the district attorney's office. Every case, every conviction, every step of her career had been building toward one moment: sitting in the witness room as the man who destroyed her family took his final breath. The execution was scheduled for Friday at midnight. But 72 hours before Robert Kane was set to die, he made one desperate request that would force Amanda to question everything she had spent 15 years believing. What he told her about her father would turn her quest for justice into the most impossible decision of her life. Amanda sat in her corner office at the district attorney's office on Tuesday morning, reviewing the final execution protocols for Robert Kane. The office was sparse, professional, with none of the personal touches that usually adorned prosecutors' spaces. No family photos, no vacation souvenirs, no decorations that suggested a life outside these walls. The only personal item was a framed newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. The headline reading, "Hero Detective Killed in Line of Duty." Below the headline was a photo of her father in his dress uniform, the same photo that had been displayed at his funeral. At 29, Amanda was the youngest senior prosecutor in the district attorney's office. Her colleagues called her brilliant but cold, dedicated but distant. She won cases with methodical precision, never showing emotion in court, never allowing personal feelings to cloud her judgment. What they didn't know was that every case she prosecuted, every criminal she put behind bars, was practice for the one case that truly mattered: Robert Kane's execution. She had tracked every appeal, every motion, every legal maneuver over the past 15 years. She had made sure she was assigned to the case when it came time for the final execution review. She had personally overseen every detail to ensure nothing would delay or prevent Friday's execution. And in 72 hours, she would sit in that witness room and watch justice finally be served. Her phone buzzed with an internal call. "Miss Ross, you have a visitor request from Riverside Correctional Facility. A Robert Kane is asking to see you." Amanda's hand froze on the phone. In 15 years, Robert Kane had never tried to contact her. He had never sent letters, never requested meetings, never acknowledged her existence. She had assumed he knew who she was, knew that Detective Jack Ross's daughter had become the prosecutor ensuring his execution would proceed. But they had never spoken. She had never wanted to give him the satisfaction of hearing her voice, of seeing how much his actions had affected her. "Miss Ross, are you still there? Tell them I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Riverside took exactly 45 minutes. Amanda had made the drive before, reviewing evidence, consulting with prison officials, ensuring every legal requirement was met. But she had never gone to see Robert Kane himself. As she walked through security, past the checkpoints and locked doors, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: nervousness. She had spent 15 years preparing to watch this man die. She hadn't prepared to speak with him. The visiting room was small, divided by reinforced glass. Robert Kane sat on the other side, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He was 52 years old now, though he looked older. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face carried the lines of someone who had lived with heavy weight for a long time. But his eyes were steady, clear, focused intently on Amanda, as she sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other through the glass, the killer and the daughter of his victim, separated by 15 years, and a barrier that represented everything that stood between them. Finally, Robert picked up the phone on his side. Amanda hesitated, then did the same. "Thank you for coming." His voice was quieter than she expected, lacking the rough edge she had imagined a killer would have. "I wasn't sure you would." Amanda kept her expression neutral, professional. "You have 72 hours before your execution. This conversation doesn't change that. I know. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm not asking you to stop the execution. I'm asking you to listen to something I should have said 15 years ago. There's nothing you can say that I want to hear. I know. But there's something you need to hear anyway." Robert leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your father wasn't who you think he was, Amanda. And what happened that night, wasn't what everyone believes. Amanda felt anger surge through her chest. Don't you dare try to smear my father's name to save yourself. I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save you from spending the rest of your life believing a lie. My father was a hero. He died trying to stop you from robbing that warehouse. The evidence was overwhelming. You were convicted by a jury of your peers. This conversation is over. Amanda started to stand, but Robert's next words stopped her. Your father was at that warehouse to kill me, not to stop a robbery. And if I hadn't shot him first, I'd be the one in the ground. Amanda sank back into her chair, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. That's a lie. It's the truth, and I can prove it if you're willing to look at evidence that was never presented at my trial. Evidence that my lawyer tried to introduce but was ruled inadmissible. Evidence that's been sitting in a storage unit for 15 years, waiting for someone to care enough to look at it. Why didn't you present this evidence at trial? Why wait 15 years? Because my lawyer was murdered 3 days after I was convicted. Maria Santos. She had gathered all the evidence about your father's real activities, about the people he was working for, about why he needed me dead. And then someone made sure she couldn't testify or help with my appeals. Amanda felt her world tilting slightly, though she refused to show it. Maria Santos died in a car accident. I remember. They covered it extensively, because she was a prominent defense attorney. It was ruled an accident. But Maria had called me the day before she died. She said she had found the proof we needed for appeal. She said she had documentation that would expose everything. And then her brakes failed on a mountain road. Robert's voice was steady, factual, not dramatic or pleading. I'm not asking you to believe me on faith. I'm asking you to look at what Maria gathered, to investigate like the prosecutor you are, to treat this like any other case where evidence might have been suppressed. And where is this supposed evidence? In a storage unit in Maria's name. The key is in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, box number 847. Maria's sister Isabel Santos has access to it. She's been waiting for 15 years for someone to care enough to look. Amanda stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation, desperation, the lies she expected from a killer facing execution. But Robert Kane simply looked tired and resigned. Why are you telling me this now? Why not years ago? Because for 15 years I convinced myself that maybe I deserved this. Maybe it didn't matter why I killed your father. Maybe the fact that I pulled that trigger was enough. But 3 months ago, Isabel Santos contacted me. She told me she was dying of cancer. She asked me if I wanted her to try one more time to get someone to look at Maria's evidence. And I realized I couldn't let an innocent woman die knowing the truth while I took the coward's way out. Isabel Santos is dying. Stage 4 breast cancer. She has maybe 6 months. She's spent 15 years maintaining that storage unit, paying the fees, hoping someone would eventually care about justice more than they cared about revenge. Robert set the phone down for a moment, ran his cuffed hands over his face, then picked it up again. Amanda, I know you hate me. You should hate me. I killed your father, whether it was self-defense or murder. I'm the reason he's dead and you grew up without him. But I'm begging you to at least talk to Isabel. Look at what Maria found, and then decide if you still want to watch me die on Friday. Amanda stood abruptly. I'll look into it, but don't mistake investigation for doubt. If you're lying, if this is some desperate attempt to delay your execution, it won't work. I'm not lying. And Amanda, when you find out the truth about your father, I want you to know something. He loved you. Whatever else he was, however deep he got into things he shouldn't have been involved in. He talked about you all the time. The few times I met him before that night, he showed everyone photos of you, bragged about how smart you were. When he came to kill me that night, his last words before I shot him were about you. He said, I have to do this for my daughter. They'll hurt my daughter if I don't. Amanda felt tears threatening for the first time in years, but she refused to let them fall in front of this man. She hung up the phone without responding, and walked out of the visiting room. But as she drove back to her office, Robert's words echoed in her mind. They'll hurt my daughter if I don't. Back at the office, Amanda pulled the case file on Maria Santos's death. It had indeed been ruled an accident, brake failure on a dangerous mountain road. But as she read the investigative reports, small details stood out that she hadn't noticed before. The brake line had been cut cleanly, though the official report attributed it to wear and tear. Maria had called her office minutes before the accident, leaving a voicemail saying she was on her way to meet with someone who had critical information. That person was never identified. Amanda found Isabel Santos's contact information through Maria's old law firm. The woman who answered sounded weak, her voice carrying the fragility of terminal illness. Isabel Santos. Yes, who is this? My name is Amanda Ross. I'm a prosecutor with the district attorney's office. I need to speak with you about your sister Maria. There was a long pause. Then, softly, you're Jack Ross's daughter. Yes. I've been waiting 15 years for you to call. Can you come to my home? I don't have much time left, and there are things you need to see. Isabel Santos lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. When she opened the door, Amanda was struck by how thin she was, how the cancer had ravaged her body, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, filled with a determination that illness couldn't diminish. Thank you for coming, Isabel said, leading Amanda to a living room filled with boxes. Maria spent the last 3 months of her life gathering this evidence. She knew it was dangerous. She knew someone wanted her to stop, but she couldn't let an innocent man die for protecting himself. You believe Robert Kane is innocent? I believe he killed your father in self-defense. Whether that makes him innocent is something you'll have to decide. Isabel opened one of the boxes, pulling out files, photographs, recordings. Maria discovered that your father was being blackmailed by a crime syndicate. They had evidence of something he did years ago, before you were born. Something that could have destroyed his career and put him in prison. They used that leverage to make him work for them. Amanda felt sick. What kind of work? Protecting their operations, looking the other way when they moved drugs, warning them about raids. Eventually they asked him to do more. They asked him to eliminate people who threatened their business. Robert Kane was a warehouse supervisor who had witnessed one of their operations. He tried to report it. Your father was sent to make sure he didn't talk. Isabel pulled out a tape recorder. Maria got this from one of the crime syndicate members, who later turned state's evidence in an unrelated case. Listen. Amanda listened to her father's voice, immediately recognizable even after 15 years. He was talking to someone discussing the problem of Robert Kane agreeing to handle it that night at the warehouse. The conversation made it clear. Jack Ross was going to murder Robert Kane to protect the crime syndicate. No. Amanda's voice broke. My father wouldn't do this. He was a good man. He was a man who made a terrible mistake when he was young, and that mistake was used to turn him into something he never wanted to be. Isabel's voice was gentle but firm. Maria found evidence of the original crime they were blackmailing him with. Your father was involved in a robbery when he was 20 years old, before he became a police officer. Someone died during that robbery. Your father was never charged, never identified, but someone found out and used it to control him for years. Amanda looked through the files with shaking hands. Bank records showing payments to her father that couldn't be explained by his salary. Surveillance photos of him meeting with known criminals. Witness statements that had been suppressed during Robert Kane's trial. Statements from people who had seen Jack Ross at the warehouse that night before Robert arrived, seen him waiting with a gun. Why didn't any of this come out at trial? Maria tried, but the judge ruled most of it inadmissible. Said it was speculative and prejudicial. The few witnesses who might have testified received threats or disappeared. Maria was building a case for appeal when she died. She had finally found the member of the crime syndicate willing to testify, to expose everything. And then her brakes failed. Who killed her? We never could prove it. The crime syndicate was sophisticated. They made it look like an accident. But Maria knew she was in danger. She recorded everything, documented everything, made sure that if something happened to her, the evidence would survive. Isabel looked at Amanda with eyes that carried 15 years of waiting. Your father wasn't a bad man, Amanda. He was a trapped man who tried to protect his family the only way he knew how. When the syndicate told him to kill Robert Kane, he believed they would hurt you if he refused. That's why he went to that warehouse, not to be a hero, to be a father. Amanda felt tears streaming down her face now, unable to stop them. 15 years of her life had been built on a foundation of lies. Her entire identity as the daughter of a hero, her career as a prosecutor seeking justice for his death, her quest for vengeance against Robert Kane. All of it was based on a story that wasn't true. Robert Kane killed my father in self-defense. Yes, your father drew his weapon first. Robert had a gun for protection because he knew someone might try to silence him. When your father entered that warehouse, when he pointed his weapon at Robert, Robert fired in self-defense. He's not a murderer. He's a man who survived an attempted murder. Amanda looked at the boxes of evidence. The documentation of her father's real life. The truth that had been hidden for 15 years. What do I do with this? That's up to you. You could ignore it. Let Robert Kane die on Friday. Preserve your father's reputation and the story everyone believes. Or you could investigate properly. Present this evidence to the courts. Stop an execution that should never have been scheduled in the first place. If I do that, my father's reputation will be destroyed. Everyone will know what he really was. Your father's reputation was destroyed the moment the crime syndicate forced him to become their tool. The question is whether his daughter will let an innocent man die to protect a lie. Amanda left Isabel's apartment with copies of all the evidence. She drove aimlessly for hours, unable to process what she had learned. The father she remembered, the hero she had idolized, the man whose death had shaped her entire life. He had been a criminal, not by choice perhaps, not willingly, but he had worked for the very people prosecutors like her spent their careers fighting. And Robert Kane, the man she had spent 15 years hating, the man whose execution she had campaigned for, had been protecting himself from murder. He had killed in self-defense and been convicted anyway, because the truth was too complicated, too damaging to powerful people who wanted it hidden. She returned to her office late that night and began a thorough investigation. She contacted the FBI, requesting information about the crime syndicate that had operated in the city 15 years ago. She found that several members had been arrested years after Robert's conviction, had turned state's evidence, had provided testimony about police corruption, but no one had ever connected those cases to Jack Ross or Robert Kane. She reviewed the original trial transcripts with new eyes, seeing now all the places where evidence had been suppressed, where witnesses had been intimidated, where the narrative had been carefully constructed to ensure Robert Kane's conviction. The case hadn't been about justice. It had been about protecting powerful people and maintaining the fiction of a hero cop. By Wednesday evening, Amanda had compiled enough evidence to request a stay of execution. She called her supervising attorney, District Attorney Michael Torres, and asked for an emergency meeting. Torres was 60 years old, a veteran prosecutor who had been with the DA's office when Jack Ross died. He had been the one to personally ensure Robert Kane received the death penalty. You want to stop Kane's execution? Torres looked at Amanda like she had lost her mind. Amanda, I know this case is personal for you, but we've been over every detail. The evidence is solid. The conviction was sound. The conviction was based on suppressed evidence and corrupted testimony. I have proof that my father was working for a crime syndicate, that he was sent to murder Robert Kane, and that Kane shot him in self-defense. Torres's expression darkened. Be very careful with what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting. I'm stating facts based on evidence that was never presented at trial, evidence that would have changed the verdict. Where did you get this evidence? From Maria Santos's personal files, the defense attorney who died shortly after the trial. She had compiled extensive documentation about my father's activities and the circumstances surrounding his death. Torres stood from his desk, walked to the window, his back to Amanda. Maria Santos died in an accident. Her brakes were cut. She was murdered to prevent her from presenting this evidence on appeal. Can you prove that? Not definitively, but I can prove that the evidence she gathered is legitimate and material to Robert Kane's case. I have bank records, recordings, witness statements, all of which point to my father being a corrupt officer working for organized crime. Torres turned back to face her, his expression hard. Amanda, think about what you're doing. You're about to destroy your father's reputation. Every case he worked on will be questioned. Every conviction will be scrutinized. His name, which has been synonymous with heroism in this city for 15 years, will become synonymous with corruption. Is that what you want his legacy to be? I want the truth to be his legacy, whatever that truth is. The truth is that your father died in the line of duty trying to stop a criminal. That's the truth that matters. That's a lie. And you know it's a lie. You knew it 15 years ago, didn't you? Torres didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. What I knew, he finally said, was that Jack Ross was a complicated man who got caught up in things he couldn't control. I also knew that Robert Kane shot him, and that the city needed to believe in the integrity of its police force. Sometimes justice is about more than individual cases. It's about maintaining public trust in institutions. So you knowingly prosecuted an innocent man to protect the reputation of a corrupt police officer. I prosecuted a man who killed a police officer. Whatever your father's complications, that fact remains unchanged. It was self-defense. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that Kane was a criminal who shot a cop. We presented the interpretation that supported justice for a fallen officer and his family. We presented the interpretation that you needed to help you grieve and move forward with your life. Amanda felt something inside her break. A foundation she hadn't known was already cracked. You used me. You used my grief, my trauma, my desire for justice to cover up the truth. We gave you a narrative you could live with. Would you have preferred to grow up knowing your father was a corrupt cop working for organized crime? Would that have been better for a 14-year-old girl? I would have preferred the truth. The truth is messy and complicated and doesn't always serve justice. Robert Kane killed your father. That's true regardless of the circumstances. He spent 15 years on death row for that killing. That's a fair outcome. It's not fair if it's based on lies. Torres sat back down, his expression softening slightly. Amanda, I understand you're struggling with this information, but think carefully before you proceed. If you halt this execution, if you present this evidence publicly, you won't just destroy your father's reputation, you'll destroy your own career. No prosecutor's office in the country will hire you. You'll be seen as a traitor to law enforcement. Is that worth it to save a man who at the end of the day still killed someone? It's worth it to stop executing innocent people. That's what we're supposed to be about. Truth and justice, not convenient narratives and institutional protection. Then file your motion. But understand that you're making a choice that can't be unmade. Amanda filed for a stay of execution Thursday morning. The motion included all of Maria Santos's evidence, testimony from Isabel Santos, and Amanda's own investigation findings. The filing created immediate chaos. Media outlets that had been preparing to cover Robert Kane's execution suddenly had a new story. The prosecutor assigned to ensure the execution was now trying to stop it, claiming the convicted killer had been protecting himself from her corrupt father. Amanda's phone exploded with calls from reporters, colleagues, former law school classmates. Some were supportive, admiring her courage in pursuing truth over vengeance. Others were hostile, accusing her of betraying her father's memory and undermining law enforcement. By Thursday afternoon, the story had gone national. The hearing for the stay of execution was scheduled for Thursday evening, giving the judge mere hours to review the evidence and make a decision. Amanda sat at the prosecution table, an unusual position for someone arguing against an execution. Across the aisle, the state's attorney general had personally taken over the case, arguing that the execution should proceed as scheduled. Judge Catherine Moore was a 60-year-old veteran of the bench, known for her careful deliberation and respect for evidence. She had presided over Robert Kane's original trial 15 years ago, which made this hearing particularly complicated. She was being asked to essentially rule that she had made errors in her original evidentiary decisions. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Amanda presented Maria Santos's evidence, played the recordings of Jack Ross discussing the planned murder of Robert Kane, showed the bank records documenting payoffs from the crime syndicate. She called Isabel Santos, who testified from a wheelchair about her sister's investigation and subsequent murder. The Attorney General argued that this evidence was unreliable, that it had been excluded from the original trial for good reasons, that Maria Santos's claims of conspiracy were speculative and prejudicial. He pointed out that regardless of Jack Ross's activities, the fact remained that Robert Kane had killed a police officer and shown no remorse for 15 years. But the most powerful moment came when Amanda addressed the court directly. Your Honor, I came to this courtroom today planning to watch Robert Kane die tomorrow night. I've spent 15 years preparing for that moment. 15 years building a career around ensuring his execution would happen. 15 years believing that his death would somehow balance the scales for my father's death. But I can't do that anymore. Not after seeing the evidence. Not after understanding what really happened that night. She looked at Robert Kane, who sat at the defense table watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. My father wasn't who I thought he was. That's painful. That changes everything I believed about my childhood, my family, my own identity. But the truth doesn't stop being true just because it's inconvenient or painful. The truth is that my father went to that warehouse to commit murder, and Robert Kane defended himself. That's what the evidence shows. That's what justice demands we acknowledge. Amanda turned back to the judge. I loved my father. I still love him, even knowing what he did. But I can't let that love be an excuse for executing an innocent man. If we proceed with this execution tomorrow, we're not serving justice. We're serving a lie. And I became a prosecutor to serve justice, not lies. Judge Moore listened to everything, reviewed the evidence, asked pointed questions of both sides. At 11 p.m. she rendered her decision. Based on the substantial new evidence presented, evidence that was not available at the original trial, and materially affects the outcome of this case, I am granting a stay of execution. Furthermore, I am ordering a full evidentiary hearing to be scheduled within 90 days to determine whether Robert Kane's conviction should be vacated based on prosecutorial misconduct and suppression of evidence. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Robert Kane's current attorneys embraced each other, crying with relief. The Attorney General immediately announced an appeal, and Amanda sat alone at the prosecution table, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than she had ever felt before. She visited Robert Kane the next morning, Friday, the day he should have been executed, but instead woke up with a chance at freedom. They sat across from each other in the same visiting room, where they had met earlier that week, separated by glass and phones, and 15 years of complicated history. You saved my life, Robert said simply. After everything, after all the reasons you had to let me die, you chose truth over revenge. I don't have words for what that means. I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was right. I know, that's what makes it meaningful. Robert leaned forward slightly. Amanda, I need you to know something. Your father wasn't a bad man. He was a good man who made one terrible mistake when he was young, and that mistake was used to trap him. In our few interactions before that night, I could see he was tormented by what he'd become. He loved you desperately. Everything he did, all the terrible things he did because he believed it would protect you. He should have come forward. He should have confessed his original crime, faced the consequences, and broken free from their control. You're right. But fear is a powerful thing, and the people controlling him made sure he understood that if he ever tried to break free, they would hurt you. They showed him photos of you walking to school. They told him about your friends, your teachers, your routines. They made it clear that his silence was the price of your safety. Amanda felt tears burning again. How do you know all this? Because the night he came to kill me, we talked first. He told me why he was there, what they'd forced him to do. He apologized. He said I didn't deserve what was about to happen, but that he had to do it to protect his daughter. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him we could go to the FBI together, that we could both testify and bring down the whole organization. He said they'd kill you before we made it out of the warehouse, and then he pulled his weapon. So you shot him. I shot him, not because I wanted to, but because if I hadn't, he would have killed me and gone home to you, and you never would have known what he'd become. I couldn't let him do that. I couldn't let him live with that guilt, so I made the choice for both of us. Amanda processed this, trying to reconcile the father she remembered with the man Robert described. Did he say anything else before he died? Yes, he said, tell my daughter I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her more than my own life. Tell her to be better than me. Robert's voice was thick with emotion. I couldn't tell you before. You wouldn't have believed me. But now, knowing what you know, I hope you can believe that those were his final words. Not the words of a corrupt cop or a criminal. The words of a father who loved his daughter enough to die protecting her. The evidentiary hearing 3 months later was a media sensation. Amanda testified about discovering the truth. Isabel Santos, in the final weeks of her life, provided testimony about her sister's investigation. FBI agents testified about the crime syndicate that had controlled Jack Ross, and forensic experts analyzed the evidence from that night at the warehouse, confirming Robert Kane's account of self-defense. The judge vacated Robert Kane's conviction and dismissed all charges. After 15 years on death row, Robert walked out of prison a free man. He was 52 years old, had lost a significant portion of his life, but was alive. Amanda was there the day he was released. They stood together outside the prison gates, facing a wall of reporters and cameras. Robert gave a brief statement about gratitude and forgiveness. Then it was Amanda's turn. 15 years ago, I promised my father I would see justice done for his death. I thought that meant watching his killer be executed. What I learned is that justice is more complicated than revenge. My father made terrible mistakes. He was controlled by terrible people, and he died trying to protect me from the consequences of those mistakes. Robert Kane survived that night, and spent 15 years paying for the crime of self-defense. That's not justice. That's tragedy compounded by lies. She looked at Robert standing beside her. I can't give Mr. Kane back the 15 years he lost. I can't undo the pain he suffered. But I can ensure that we learn from this case, that we question our assumptions about guilt and innocence, that we demand truth even when lies are more comfortable. That's what real justice requires. The fallout from the case was extensive. District Attorney Michael Torres resigned under pressure. An investigation into other cases Jack Ross had worked revealed several that needed to be reviewed for potential corruption. The crime syndicate that had controlled him was already largely dismantled, but remaining members faced new charges. And Amanda's career, as Torres had predicted, was effectively over in traditional prosecution. But Amanda discovered she didn't want a traditional career anymore. She left the DA's office and started a non-profit organization dedicated to investigating potential wrongful convictions, particularly cases where evidence might have been suppressed or witnesses intimidated. She called it the Truth and Justice Project, and Robert Kane was her first board member. They worked together over the following years, an unlikely partnership forged from tragedy and truth. Robert had lost 15 years of his life. Amanda had lost her idealized image of her father, but they had both gained something more valuable, an understanding that justice isn't about revenge or protecting comfortable narratives. It's about truth, however painful that truth might be. 5 years after Robert's release, Amanda sat in her office at the Truth and Justice Project, reviewing a case remarkably similar to Robert's. A young man convicted of killing a police officer under suspicious circumstances, evidence that had been suppressed, witnesses who had been too afraid to testify. She picked up the phone to call Robert. I have a case you should see. It reminds me of yours. Send me the files. I'll review them tonight. After hanging up, Amanda looked at the photo on her desk. Not the newspaper clipping of her father, the hero. That was gone. Instead, she kept a photo from her 8th birthday. Her father laughing as she blew out candles. It was the father she chose to remember, flawed, trapped, but loving. Not the hero everyone needed him to be. Not the villain the evidence revealed. Just a man who made terrible choices trying to protect what he loved most. The work consumed them both. Over the next 5 years, the Truth and Justice Project investigated over 200 cases of potential wrongful conviction. They successfully exonerated 17 people, exposed corruption in 3 different police departments, and changed the conversation about criminal justice reform in their state. Amanda became a sought-after expert on prosecutorial misconduct and wrongful convictions. Robert became an advocate for people serving time for crimes they didn't commit, speaking at conferences and working with inmates who had no one else fighting for them. But the ghosts of their shared past never fully disappeared. On the 15th anniversary of Jack Ross's death, Amanda drove to his grave for the first time since she'd learned the truth about him. She stood before his headstone, which still read Detective Jack Ross, hero, devoted father. She had fought with the cemetery board about whether to change it, but ultimately decided to leave it. Her father had been devoted to her, even if his methods of protection had been terribly flawed. Robert joined her there, standing a respectful distance away until Amanda gestured for him to come closer. I still don't know what to feel, she admitted. I hate what he did. I hate that he worked for those people. But I also understand why he did it, and I miss him. Is that wrong? To miss someone who did such terrible things? It's not wrong. It's human. People aren't just one thing. Your father was capable of both great love and terrible choices. Most people are. They stood in silence for several minutes. 2 people forever connected by one violent night, and the 15 years of lies that followed. Then Amanda spoke again. Thank you for not giving up. For keeping your story alive even when no one believed you. For surviving long enough for the truth to matter. Thank you for being brave enough to accept the truth even when it destroyed everything you believed in. That's a courage most people never have to show. The anniversary became an annual ritual for them. Every year on the date of Jack Ross's death, Amanda and Robert would meet at his grave, a moment of remembrance for a complicated man whose death had bound their fates together in unexpected ways. They would share stories about the cases they'd worked on that year, the lives they'd helped save, the injustices they'd helped correct. 10 years after Robert's release, The Truth and Justice Project had grown into a nationally recognized organization with satellite offices in 6 states. Amanda had trained a team of investigators and attorneys who shared her commitment to uncovering truth over convenient narratives. They had exonerated 43 people, prevented 6 executions, and exposed systematic corruption in multiple jurisdictions. One afternoon, Amanda received a call from a young woman named Sarah Ross. "Miss Ross, my name is Sarah. I'm your cousin. My father was Jack Ross's younger brother." Amanda had lost contact with most of her father's family after the truth came out about his activities. Many of them had been angry with her for exposing his corruption, for choosing truth over protecting his reputation. "Sarah, I remember you. You were just a kid at my father's funeral. I was 8. I'm 23 now, and I'm in law school. I'm calling because I want to know if I can intern with your organization this summer. I've been following your work, and I think what you're doing is what my uncle would have actually wanted. Not the lies and cover-ups, the truth." Amanda felt tears welling up. "Your family is okay with you working with me. My parents weren't at first, but they've come around. They've realized that what you did took more courage than staying silent, and I want to learn from you. I want to be the kind of lawyer who chooses truth even when it's hard." That summer, Sarah became Amanda's protege. The resemblance to Jack Ross was sometimes painful. The same mannerisms and expressions that reminded Amanda of her father. But working with Sarah also brought healing. It showed her that the next generation didn't have to be defined by the mistakes of the previous one. That family could be rebuilt on foundations of truth rather than lies. Sarah met Robert during her internship and was initially uncomfortable around him. "You killed my uncle," she said during their first meeting, her voice uncertain. "I did," Robert replied simply. "I wish I hadn't had to. I wish your uncle and I could have found another way. But that night, it was his life or mine, and I chose mine." Sarah worked on several cases that summer, learning from both Amanda and Robert about the complexity of justice and the importance of questioning official narratives. By the end of her internship, she had developed a deep respect for both of them. "You know what's amazing?" she told Amanda one evening. "You two should hate each other. You have every reason to be enemies, but instead, you've built something beautiful together. You've turned tragedy into purpose. That's what healing looks like." Amanda replied, "Not forgetting, not pretending the pain didn't happen, but choosing to build something meaningful from the broken pieces." 15 years after Robert's release, Amanda received a phone call that brought their journey full circle. The Attorney General's office was launching a major investigation into cold cases from the era when the crime syndicate had been active. They wanted Amanda's expertise, wanted her to review cases that might have been influenced by corrupt officers or suppressed evidence. Among the cases was one that made Amanda's blood run cold. A young woman named Jennifer Martinez had been murdered 25 years ago. The killer had never been found. But in reviewing the case files, Amanda discovered her father's name in the investigative notes. Jack Ross had been one of the responding officers, and there were inconsistencies in his report, details that didn't match other officers' accounts. Amanda called Robert immediately. "I found something. A case my father worked on. I think he might have covered up evidence to protect the syndicate." They investigated together, spending weeks reviewing old files, tracking down witnesses who had been ignored or intimidated at the time. What they discovered was that Jennifer Martinez had witnessed a drug deal involving the syndicate. Jack Ross had been assigned to make sure she didn't testify. He hadn't killed her, but he had destroyed evidence that could have led to her killer, and had intimidated witnesses who might have come forward. Finding Jennifer's family was difficult. Her parents had died years ago, but she had a sister, Carmen, who was now in her 50s. Amanda and Robert drove to Carmen's home, carrying evidence that would finally explain what had happened to Jennifer 25 years earlier. "Your sister witnessed a crime," Amanda explained, sitting in Carmen's living room. "The people involved wanted her silenced. A corrupt police officer, my father, destroyed evidence and intimidated witnesses to protect them. I'm so sorry. If my father had done his job properly, Jennifer's killer might have been caught." Carmen listened to everything, tears streaming down her face. "For 25 years, I thought the police tried their best. I thought they just couldn't solve her murder. You're telling me they deliberately sabotaged the investigation? I'm telling you my father did. And I'm telling you I'm going to make sure the case is reopened with the evidence he destroyed. We're going to find out who killed your sister." The investigation took another 6 months, but eventually, they identified Jennifer's killer, a mid-level member of the syndicate, who was already serving time for other crimes. He was charged with Jennifer's murder, and Amanda personally prosecuted the case. Standing in court, presenting evidence that her own father had once destroyed, felt like a final act of redemption. Carmen attended every day of the trial. After the conviction, she approached Amanda with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I know this couldn't have been easy, prosecuting a case your father tried to bury. But you gave my family closure. You gave Jennifer justice, even though it came 25 years too late. It's what she deserved. It's what all victims deserve. Truth and justice, no matter how long it takes." 20 years after Robert Kane's release, the Truth and Justice Project celebrated its 20th anniversary with a gala fundraiser. The event brought together ex-honorees they'd helped free, family members of victims whose cases they'd solved, and activists fighting for criminal justice reform. Amanda, now 49, stood at the podium to address the crowd. 20 years ago, I was a prosecutor who believed justice meant punishing the guilty and protecting the innocent. I thought I knew exactly who was guilty and who was innocent. Then I met Robert Kane, a man I'd spent 15 years wanting to watch die, and he taught me that justice is more complicated than I'd ever imagined. She looked at Robert, now 72, sitting in the front row. Robert taught me that the truth matters more than convenient narratives, that real justice requires us to question our assumptions and follow evidence even when it leads somewhere we don't want to go, that courage isn't about pursuing revenge, it's about pursuing truth, wherever that pursuit takes us. Amanda went on to describe the hundreds of cases they'd worked, the lives they'd changed, the systematic reforms they'd helped implement. None of this would have been possible if I'd chosen revenge over truth, if I'd let my 15-year-old self's promise to watch a man die determine my entire life. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is let go of who we thought we needed to be and become who we're actually called to be. After the gala, Amanda and Robert stood on the balcony of the event space, looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if that night never happened?" Amanda asked. "Every day. But I also recognize that everything I've done since my release, every person I've helped, every life I've touched, it all came from that terrible night. I can't wish it away without wishing away all the good that came after. My father would be 72 now, your age. I wonder what he would think of all this, of you being alive, of me working with you, of the organization we built. I think he'd be proud, not of his own choices, but of yours. You became exactly what he wanted you to be, someone who couldn't be corrupted, who couldn't be forced to compromise their principles. He protected you so you could be better than him, and you are." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had been through hell together, and come out the other side with purpose and meaning. The 15-year-old girl who had promised to watch her father's killer die was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, however painful. It was about giving every person, no matter what they'd been accused of, a fair chance based on evidence rather than convenient narratives. And the man who had spent 15 years on death row for the crime of defending himself had become living proof that the system could be wrong, that lives could be saved when people were brave enough to question official stories, that it was never too late for the truth to matter. Dear viewers, the story of Amanda Ross and Robert Kane reminds us that revenge and justice are not the same thing. Amanda spent 15 years preparing for a moment of vengeance, only to discover that the man she planned to watch die was innocent of murder. The hero father she had idolized was a flawed man trapped by his own mistakes, and the choice she faced, between comfortable lies and painful truth, defined who she would become. This story teaches us that seeking truth requires courage, especially when that truth destroys everything we believed. It teaches us that justice is more important than protecting reputations or institutions. It teaches us that the people we label as criminals are often more complicated than the stories we tell about them. And it teaches us that it's never too late to choose truth over revenge, even when revenge is what we've spent our entire lives pursuing. Amanda could have let Robert Kane die. She could have preserved her father's legacy, maintained her career, and satisfied the 15-year-old girl who promised to watch her father's killer pay for his crime. Instead, she chose to be a prosecutor who served truth rather than vengeance. And in doing so, she saved an innocent man's life and began a career that has since saved many more. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is let go of the stories we've told ourselves about who we are and who our loved ones were. Sometimes justice requires us to accept that the heroes we believed in were human and flawed. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us everything we thought we wanted, but those are the moments that define us. Those are the choices that determine whether we serve truth or simply serve our own need for revenge. Robert Kane spent 15 years on death row for the crime of defending himself against a corrupt police officer. Amanda Ross spent 15 years preparing to watch him die. But in the end, they both found something more valuable than revenge. The truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. Their partnership over 20 years proved that even the deepest wounds can heal when people choose truth over comfortable lies, that enemies can become allies when united by a common purpose, that the quest for justice is never really over. There are always more cases to investigate, more innocent people to free, more families seeking truth about what really happened to their loved ones. The Truth and Justice Project continues to operate today, now led by Sarah Ross, Amanda's cousin and Jack Ross's niece. Amanda serves as Director Emeritus, still working cases but also mentoring the next generation of lawyers who understand that real justice requires questioning authority and following evidence wherever it leads. Robert, now in his 70s, continues to speak at conferences and visit prisons, offering hope to people serving time for crimes they didn't commit. The story of Amanda and Robert reminds us that our worst moments don't have to define us, that we can choose to transform pain into purpose, tragedy into meaning, rage into determination to make the world more just. Amanda's 15-year quest for revenge became a 20-year mission to save innocent lives. Robert's 15 years on death row became a platform to advocate for others facing the same injustice. And perhaps most importantly, their story reminds us that it's never too late to choose truth, never too late to admit we were wrong, never too late to change course when we discover that the path we've been on was built on lies. The courage to face painful truths is the courage that changes the world, one case at a time, one exoneration at a time, one family finding closure at a time.